What compression does is gain reduction. Now, why in the world would you want to reduce gain? Well, I would want to reduce gain so that I can make sure I don't have too many peaks in my signal flow, but also I do it so that I can bring everything up and have a consistent volume, a consistent perceived volume to the audience, whether I'm talking quietly or if I'm speaking loudly. I have some compression on my podcast mic all the time for exactly that reason. I want you to be able to hear me even if my level into the microphone fluctuates up or down. Most singers don't always sing at the same level. Guitars don't always play at the same level. And you want to have some ability to have a difference there so that you can be musical with it, but you want everything heard. And in a live sound, especially, if you got live drums and amps and stuff on stage, you need to have a minimum level of sound. And so the idea behind compression is that you bring down the peaks so that you can bring up the overall level. And the reason we call it compression is that you are taking the dynamic range of the signal and compressing it down to be less of a dynamic range, meaning less difference, less volume difference between the quiet portions and the loud portions. Okay. With that said, the first thing you set on a compressor, well, the first thing you do on a compressor, the first thing I do is I look at the input volume and I see where that's coming in. That's helpful because I know, all right, is the signal peaking? Is the signal too low? And if it's this is a match, at least when put in line like we're talking about here, where it's the first thing in line after gain. This should match your gain exactly because there's nothing else there. There's the gain and then there's the compression. Then I look at where I want to set my threshold. The threshold is the point at which gain reduction begins. Anything below the threshold, no gain is going to be reduced. So if I'm talking quietly, we're below the threshold and there's no gain reduction. But if I'm talking loud, we get some gain reduction. So you pick where you want the threshold to be, and then you're going to pick the ratio. The ratio is what amount of how many decibels you're going to lower it for every decibel that it goes up. So if it goes up 3 dB and you want to pull it down 1, great. You got a nice little curve on it. If it goes up 3 dB and you want to pull it down 3 dB, that's a flat ratio, right? That there is no difference between the threshold point and anything louder than it. And so if you want to set up a limiter, that would be one way to do it. But we like to be musical about things, so we set the ratio, and then that's, and the nice part about a lot of digital mixers is you get to see this. You get to see the curve. You get to see when gain reduction is being kicked in. On the Mackie mixer, it's the GR column, and it comes down from the top. And then the third thing I set is what's called gain or makeup gain. So if the compression is reducing the gain, you're probably going to need to give some back to get back to that point where you like the signal to sit so that there's less noise than, less noise than signal. So you will adjust the makeup gain to sit right at about that zero unity point when someone is talking. And if you're looking at the video, you can see I've got, if I'm talking quietly like this versus if I'm talking really loud like this, there's probably a 15 dB gap when on the input and only maybe a 4 dB gap or a 5 dB gap on the output. General rule of thumb, the perceived volume level doubles every 3 dB that you go. So use that as your math. I like to have the compression kind of sit things in about a 5 dB range, especially if I'm not out in front mixing. If we're doing what I like to call the Braille mix, where you kind of just set it up and forget it for the night, I like to have about 5 or 6 dB at most so that I know where the sound is going to be. And if somebody peaks in going, well, it's going to be all right. So we've set up our gain and we've set up our compression. And now we've got sort of a nice consistent signal